Okay, so we just talked about what we can observe versus what we infer in the oral phase. Now let's talk about the pharyngeal phase, where it's mostly all inferred. So if we start at the top with what we can directly observe, then the only thing I put here is higher laryngeal movement, and even then, we don't always see it due to reasons like poor posture or someone having extra tissue around the neck, for example. Then there are lots of behaviors which we can directly observe, but the problem is we tend to automatically attribute these to a pharyngeal phase impairment because when we write our notes, we usually put these observations under the pharyngeal phase heading, don't we? So under pharyngeal phase, we write things like coughing, wet, gurgly voice, multiple swallows, changes in respiration. And we can see these things, that's true. Do we know what they mean though? And we'll get into detail on that later in terms of what the research says. Then there are things which we can't see, but we infer. So it's not about direct observation at this point. So we infer the swallow is delayed. Now, there is some confusion about what we're all referring to when we say swallow delay. And I'll talk about that and I'll give you some feedback on how different therapists are measuring or interpreting this. We infer that high laryngeal excursion is poor or that it's impaired or even that it's adequate. And I'll explain why I think we shouldn't be using any of those terms. We infer there's poor airway protection, usually because someone coughed during the examination. Oh no, they aspirated, but maybe they actually protected their airway super well with that cough. We don't know. We infer aspirational penetration by some of those behaviors I mentioned before, or just then, the coughing or changes in vocal quality. Is that what those behaviors mean, though? And just to add, we also infer good airway protection sometimes. So, for example, if someone coughs on thin fluids, we then trial thickened fluids and there's no cough, then we think, great, no aspiration. But I'll talk about what the 2018 Miles study found and also a newer study in 2024 that had similar results in terms of patterns of silent aspiration on thin versus thickened fluids. And we might infer there's residue because of multiple swallows. Well, how many swallows is normal for particular consistencies? We'll get into that as well. So we're going to delve into what the research says about most of these things during the masterclass. But for now, onto the esophageal phase.